Good morning and welcome to the 9th meeting of the Public Audit and Post-Legislative Scrutiny Committee in 2021. I have received apologies from Neil Bibby MSP this morning. Agenda item 1 is decision on taking business in private. I am assuming that everyone will agree unless you indicate otherwise to me. So, does any member object to taking items 4, 5, 6 and 7 in private this morning? Thank you, I'll take that as agreement. Agenda item 2 is COVID-19, tracking the implications of COVID-19 on Scotland's public finances. I welcome our witnesses to the meeting this morning: Stephen Boyle, Auditor General for Scotland, Mark Taylor, Audit Director, Audit Services, and Fiona Dingle, Audit Manager, Performance and Best Value, all from Audit Scotland. I understand that the Auditor General will make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everybody. When I spoke to the committee in August 2020 about the implications of COVID-19 on Scotland's public finances, it was difficult for any of us to foresee the direction of the pandemic. We are, of course, continuing to see its public health and economic impact. COVID-19 remains the biggest fiscal and policy challenge facing the Scottish Government for the past 2 decades of devolution. There are increasing pressures on public revenues and spending, and the Scottish budget is subject to ever more volatility, uncertainty and complexity. It will remain challenging to match spending to the available funding in the coming years. This will need to be done in a way that minimises the disruption to individuals, public bodies and services, and ensures value for money for public funds. COVID-19 continues to disproportionately affect Scotland's most vulnerable citizens, and it will widen inequalities. How the Scottish Government and public bodies respond to that challenge will be significant issues in the years to come. In this briefing paper, we update on the impact of COVID-19 on Scotland's public finances. We present the sources of funding for the budget and our analysis of the spending announcements at the end of December 2020. We also analyse the emerging risks, the Scottish Government's management of the Scottish budget and the performance of public services. Finally, we outline how public audit is responding to these matters. This is the second paper in a series, and we will continue to track the impact of the pandemic on public finances on an ongoing. The pace and volume of announcements means that some of the numbers in our paper have been superseded since its publication. We'll do our best to capture any of those changes in our answers this morning. Convener, I'm joined by Mark Taylor and Fiona Dingle, and between us we'll look to answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Auditor General. We lost your audio just right at the end there, but we caught the vast majority of what you said. So maybe broadcasting, I'm sure, will keep an eye on that. I'm going to ask Colin Beattie to open questioning for the committee, please.
Thank you, Convener. Auditor General, clearly the challenges that COVID-19 has brought are enormous. A key element in getting out of this will, of course, be contingency planning. Is it clear what the Scottish Government is doing in terms of contingency planning as we move out of the pandemic, or at least hopefully move out of the pandemic and into a sort of a post-COVID world? Do you think that they are already tackling that adequately?
I would agree with you, Mr. Beattie. I think the importance of contingency planning, and perhaps specifically in the context of this work, the importance of scenario and financial planning as it relates to the volatility of the circumstances that we're facing, are absolutely vital. It's one of the key points that we make in the paper, that effective budget management, allowing for all the scenarios and volatility, is essential. So we make reference, I think, in particular to the medium-term financial strategy, which is a welcome presence. The point that we make, actually, allowing for the presence of scenarios, is that we think there's still more scope to go somewhat further with the medium-term financial strategy, particularly to make the connection what outcomes achieved from public spending. So some progress, but still scope to go further, Mr. Beattie.
In terms of contingency planning, which areas do you consider are the most critical to pick up on in terms of contingency planning?
So I think it's essential that really, if we track through from where the public spending has focused most directly during the course of the pandemic, we've sought to do some analysis of that in our paper, and particularly looking at Exhibits 5, where we've analysed where public spending has been made during the course of the pandemic. That inevitably will be an area of focus, but it's perhaps difficult to be entirely forward-looking at the moment, in that the areas of focus of spending attributable to the pandemic may not be where government priorities will be as we emerge from the pandemic and priorities change and responses evolve with that. I would say it matters in the round that contingency planning is effective, that it allows for public services to continue to be delivered effectively and for the government to have the flexibility that it needs in order to respond to events. I think, as we've spoken about previously, is that clearly the volatility of the past year is that we don't know whether this is a once in a century event or whether there'll be many more. This all the more need for flexibility and adequate planning, as you suggest.
I mean, we know there are areas that are definitely under pressure, and the difficulties of addressing backlogs in areas like the NHS, obviously, local government, the courts. It's not just the case of picking up where we were before. We'll be significantly behind due to the pandemic. Are you satisfied that the contingency planning that the government's doing will pick up and address that?
I think it's probably too early to give you that level of assurance. I think the issues are known, as you say, in terms of what COVID has meant for the delivery of public services has changed fundamentally. So you mentioned, and we touched on in the paper, some of the impacts it's having in the justice sector, the courts backlog. When we spoke in recent weeks, and as the committee may consider later on this morning, about the backlog that we're seeing in our NHS through what that's meant for waiting times and so forth. I think it's clear that the issues are known and understood. What needs to happen, and will be on the radar of government and public services, is when they are able to, as part of the ongoing delivery of services through the pandemic, point that they become able to think about what the future looks like, whether it's to return to the normality that we've known, or perhaps differently, to reimagining how public services will be delivered. All of these scenarios need to be captured in the planning that public bodies are doing.
Auditor General, you said you were going to be doing follow-up reports periodically on this situation. How frequently do you see these coming forward?
Regularly, Mr. Beattie. I think we are anticipating that there will be, I'm hesitant to put a precise number on it because we're just in the final throes of finalising our work programme in consultation with colleagues, after we receive feedback from the committee and others in the Parliament. But we anticipate that regular intervals over the course of the year, 2 to 3 times, so that public audit plays its part in supporting public understanding, parliamentary scrutiny of spending. And we'll continue to do that through a series of reports, and I think what we've termed it following the pandemic pound, make the judgments about how well money has been spent, and then, as you've suggested, about what that means for the future delivery of public services across our public bodies. So regular outputs from Audit Scotland during the course of this year and beyond.
Well, clearly it'll be the new committee coming in after the election that will be following up on this, and I'm sure they'll be anxious to ensure it's included in their work schedule. So any indications of frequency would obviously help them. Thank you, Auditor General. Back to you, Convener.
Alex Neil, please.
Thank you, Convener. Auditor General, I've got 2 questions. My first one is following up on the UK National Audit about the money wasted as a result of the lack of preparedness for a COVID pandemic. And in particular, the National UK Office quoted the fact that £12 billion had been spent on emergency PPE sourcing, and had the preparations been done and the storage of PPE been kept, that would have cost £2 billion, not £12 billion. So in that item alone, £10 billion of UK taxpayers' money was wasted as a result of the incompetence of not being prepared for the pandemic. What's the equivalent figure for Scotland? Not just in PPE, but indeed on other associated items.
Do you recall, Mr Neil, that in our NHS overview report in the past few weeks that we similarly commented on the circumstances around preparedness, Scottish Government, in terms of pandemic planning? We also drew attention to the scope for more preparedness, and particularly on a couple of items that emerged prominently during the course of the pandemic, one about PPE and the other to the extent that our care homes were prepared for a pandemic. What we didn't do, and I think what we spoke about in that paper, is our intention to examine detail of the contracts that have been spent. We signalled that Scottish Government had used the provisions in emergency regulations to source contracts more quickly and more directly than it would otherwise have done through typical tendering arrangements. We're in the process of going through that work. We'll be reporting publicly two separate ways. One is a separate report on use of PPE, following on from the NHS overview report. And then the second route will be through the audit of NHS National Services Scotland. We'll be reporting during 2021 on that number. So I don't have a figure for you yet that draws a comparison between the amounts that Scotland had spent, what it subsequently spent, and then any value for money judgment on that. But it's something we'll be following through and we'll be reporting publicly during the course of the year.
Can I ask, why is it the UK Audit Office could give us a figure about 6 weeks ago and you can't give us a figure yet for Scotland?
So we're in the process of doing that work.
No, but they must have done that work. They must have done that work. So why have you not already done that work? So,
forgive me, we are in the process of doing that work, and we'll be reporting as soon as we're able to. Rest assured, we want to do that. We are prioritising.
That doesn't answer my question. I mean, the UK National Audit Office has done the calculations on £12 billion worth of PPE. So they've done that in the timescale. The timescales are the same north and south of the border in terms of the securing of the PPE and so on. So why has your office not yet produced an equivalent figure for Scotland?
So we will be producing a figure, Mr Neil, and
that doesn't answer the question though. Why have you not done it?
So we're in the midst of doing it, and we'll be reporting it as soon as we're able to. I recognise the timescales that the NAO have produced this work. We are doing so, and we'll be reporting as soon as we're able to. Rest assured, it's a very important matter. It's a continuation of the work that we've been doing on PPE already through the NHS overview report, and we'll be reporting two further ways through a report on PPE and through the audit of NHS National Services Scotland. We do recognise this important.
So when will you be in a position to tell the taxpayers in Scotland what the equivalent figure is for Scotland?
So we'll be doing that over the course of the spring and into the summer through two separate outputs, Mr Neil, on those 2 points. So as quickly as we're able to, we'll be reporting that.
I don't find that very satisfactory. The fact that the UK National Office could so quickly come up with a figure, and yet the Scottish Audit Office is going to take something like 6, possibly 9 months after the UK office before they give us an equivalent figure. Sure, you should be moving much faster than that.
So I think what I need to do then is to see if what we like to do typically is to base it upon all of the evidence and form the judgments and reporting therein. What may be an option for us is, much like we look to do in this paper, is to undertake a complementary audit output. I think probably the thing for me to say, Mr. Neil, is one for me to take away and see if there's any scope to accelerate that in discussions and come back to the committee, see if we can move further with the timescales. Rest assured, I do recognise the importance of the issue and looking to do this as quickly as possible. I'm
sure you realise it doesn't look very good when we can get a UK figure in February, possibly it was January, I can't remember exactly when, and we have to wait till maybe July, August, September, October before we get an equivalent figure for Scotland. I've got a similar question on the cost of the backlog catch-up, because obviously, unavoidably, a huge backlog has built up in the National Health Service in Scotland in terms of operations and other procedures, appointments and all the rest of it. Trying to get proper injections, for example, for people with chronic pain is almost an impossibility at the moment. That's going to add additional costs because these people are attending accident and emergency departments, which they would not have to do if they were getting the injections. I do not understand why, at this stage in the pandemic, these injections, for example, are not available. So are you looking at the cost of catching up, the cost of the backlog, and also taking a critical eye over areas and health boards which should by now be delivering certain services and are utterly failing to do so?
Absolutely, yes. I think building on the conversation that we had with the committee in respect of our NHS overview report, and maybe later on this morning, a key focus of our work is on the remobilisation and what the implications of the NHS in Scotland on pausing its waiting times improvement plan and what that means for the future, both in terms of cost of future delivery, catching up on the backlog, which undoubtedly will be very significant sums of money, and also what that means for the patient experience. All of that is part of our plan and will be reported as part of our work programme during 2020.
That's very good. Can I just pick up on that last point about patient experience? Because while I recognise your auditors and your primary focus is around the money, it's also about value for money. And, you know, a lot of people are very concerned at the moment in terms of, for example, lack of adequate access in some areas to GP services. They don't understand why. It's not as if the GPs in Scotland are heavily involved in the vaccination programme. I've already mentioned the dire problem that chronic pain patients are having in places like Lanarkshire, not able to get simple, regular infusions and injections, which is resulting in a terrible experience for them and actually additional costs for the health service. So when you're doing this, will you please talk to patients and patient groups, such as the chronic pain group, to get the feedback on the human cost of this, as well as the financial cost to the health service and to others?
Very happy to make that commitment, Mr. Neil. And I think it's with some of the conversations that I've had with the committee already, and you'll have seen through our plans for our work programme that inequalities and access to service is a key area of our work, really through all of our reporting. And I'm also very mindful of the feedback that the committee gave to the consultation on the work programme about what regional inequalities and access to services. So both those points captured in our reporting, and we'll happily engage with the group that you mentioned on chronic pain to build that into our understanding and other interest groups so that we've got a rounded picture of what remobilisation process begins to look like.
I'm sure groups representing cancer patients and others will want to talk to you as well, Auditor General. But that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Much appreciated. Thank you, Convener.
Graham Simpson, please.
Thanks, Convener. Auditor General, just going back on what Alex Neil was asking you about that excess costs and the fact that we had a report done down south. You're aware that, you know, this Parliament's coming to an end. This committee, I think, has only got one more meeting. So is it not possible for you to give us an indicative figure, you know, within the next couple of weeks, even?
I think what I would hesitate to be definitive on that, Mr. Simpson. What I would look to do is to say whether we've got the information and numbers. I think we're conscious that that the evidence supports our numbers. If we're able to do so, we will, but I wouldn't want to give a false expectation amongst the committee. So I think it's probably one that I would need to take away after the meeting and to speak to colleagues as to how our work is progressing before we can come back publicly.
Okay, that would be appreciated. Now, there's been a huge amount of Barnett consequentials that have flowed to Scotland, and there was extra announced by the Chancellor in the budget. Have you been able to track that money, and have you been able to follow the consequentials and see if they've been spent where they're meant to be spent, and indeed if it's been spent at all?
I'll ask Fiona to come in a moment just to say a bit about the scale of the Barnett consequentials. Recognising, I think, what we look to reference in my introductory remarks is that it's a very fast-moving and volatile picture, and I guess has been over the course of the year, but the same number of announcements. The complexity of what has been money that's already been announced, but we've sought to do that through this paper and really and track what that's meant for the timing of when the budget, the UK budget, the Scottish budget and the spring budget revision. I'll maybe ask Fiona just to say where we're at in terms of our current understanding about the number of Barnett consequentials and the Scottish Government's own commitment has been spent and what will be carried forward to next.
Fiona?
Hello, thank you. Absolutely. So the spring budget revision that came out just after our publication highlighted that the 8.6 billion of Barnett consequentials for this year has been allocated. We're also aware that there was a further 1.1 billion for 2020-21 that was released later in the year, and that's been moved forward into the 2021-22 budget. Thank you.
So that's, just to confirm, that's a total of 9.7 billion.
Yes, that's right.
In Barnett consequentials. And how much of that has been allocated or spent?
The spring budget revision confirmed how much has been allocated and what is the final budget for the year.
What I'm trying to get at is if 9.7 billion is coming or has come to Scotland, it probably all hasn't come yet, but how much of it has been spent or allocated? So we know it's here, but has it been spent?
Yeah, I think the budget revision showed us what's been allocated to different budget lines. In terms of what's actually been spent, we haven't got a complete figure for that as yet. In the report, we highlight some areas of. Sorry.
So we don't know how. Yeah, basically we don't know how much of that 9.7 billion, or if you just take the earlier figure of 8.6. Which came before the budget. So we don't know what's happened to that money, or all of it. Is that correct?
That's right. So I think we've, in our paper, we highlight some areas of actual spend. The Scottish Government were able to provide funds for health, and we refer to transport and some business spending that is publicly available. And in terms of that overall picture, I think that the problem has been getting financial information pulled centrally together from a wide range of sources. But it's very important that that information is tracked in terms of, and also is reported publicly for Parliament and for the public.
It's absolutely right. It's vital. If that money's come to the Scottish Government, we need to know that it's being used for the purpose that it's meant for, and B, that it's not being dashed away somewhere. I see the Auditor General wants in.
Just to confirm, Mr Simpson, we will be reporting, so the Scottish Government will be reporting what it's spent in its consolidated accounts. That which are audited each year by us, and they will be the complete record of how all of the 8.6 billion of Barnett consequentials. As you rightly point out, 1.1 billion of those consequentials that came through from the UK government have been agreed between both governments that they'll be carried forward into the 21-22 budget. As Fiona notes, it's what effectively this is doing is kind of live time reporting, but the numbers haven't yet been audited. So we capture in the paper aspects of what we know have been spent, but the definitive picture of what the final number will be, like, there's two stages. One is when the Cabinet Secretary for Finance will report to the Parliament on the outturn numbers to Parliament during the summer, and when we complete our audit of consolidated accounts autumn, that will be the definitive record. Firstly, what the total number that was spent, and then beginning to report on how well that money was spent. So it will be during the course of 21 calendar year that we begin to be definitive as to where all the money's gone and how well it was spent.
Can I just say, Mark, Graham, sorry to interrupt. Mark Taylor would like to add something on this as well, please. Mark. Okay.
Thank you, Convener. The Auditor General's broadly covered the point I was going to come in on, but just add a little colour around. Just add a little colour around that, if I may. So the challenge here is one of this being a moving target as we've gone through the year, as everybody on the committee understands. What we are able to say is what has been committed in terms of the money has been earmarked and passed on to bodies that are then spending or administrating that money. What's more difficult is to get that aggregate amount of how much has then been spent by each of those bodies. And you'll see from the exhibits in the report the range of public bodies that are involved in that. That's a process that culminates in the preparation of the accounts, and as Auditor General says, will give us definitive figures and audited figures around that. But also to recognise that real challenge that government's facing in terms of that information flow back from all the bodies that are spending that money through time and additions through time to pull that overarching picture together. So we've done what we can in the report to give a sense of that, but really to recognise the scale of the challenge here. What's fundamentally important, of course, is money gets to the places that it's needed and that the government's assigned it to as quickly as possible. And we'll be able to pick up on that in the course of our continuing work.
So I guess my final question would be, when are we going to know what's happened to the money?
Right, so I think really goes back to those two stages, Mr. Simpson. You'll know what the outturn is when the Cabinet Secretary for Finance reports to Parliament summer, and then we'll come in having audited those numbers. As rightly as Mark says, that will take place in a wide range of public bodies, and I think Exhibit 6 to the paper, I think, begins to illustrate just how many public bodies are involved in the spending of COVID monies. There'll be a range of accumulation of reporting through individual bodies, but most important, I think, for this committee's interest will be the audited numbers through the consolidated accounts of the Scottish Government. So those two stages feel like the real milestones to look out for about how much has been spent and how well it's been spent.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Okay, Bill Bowman, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. I'm just following the previous line of questioning. I think I have to support the Auditor General in not issuing numbers that he's not happy that he's done all the work with, just even if there's still a sort of press wish to get figures out quickly. But Auditor General, the report highlights that information on actual spend is limited. What concerns does this represent in terms of monitoring and auditing public spending? Are appropriate monitoring systems in place? Can you explain how the money just goes from the Scottish Government's coffers to wherever it's meant to go? Is it straight out of their bank account, or is it more complicated?
I'll do my best, Mr. Bowman, actually, and I'll maybe ask Mark and Fiona to contribute as they see fit. I think it is complicated. Some of it, and in particular the flow of funds, is not what's typically been used to. Distribution of monies outside public bodies, and I think it probably illustrates best. So some of the monies we look to capture in the report have been spent by public bodies, but very significant amounts, in particular in the early stages of the pandemic, were spent on amounts to support individuals and businesses through some of the grant arrangements. Many of those monies were distributed through local authorities, or through the enterprise agencies. So we'll be auditing that through the individual annual audits of these organisations and in a series of performance audit reporting to comment on how well the money's been spent. But it is, I think, as Mark says, it is something of a moving target, as particularly as the year progresses. Where the important safeguards that take place is that there's monthly reporting through the individual bodies, and you'll be familiar with management accounting, progress against grants, spend targets and so forth, and all of the importance that monitoring is happening in bodies, and that the government is also tracking what money has been spent as it distributes money to public bodies around the system.
So does the Scottish Government say the money is spent when it pays it to an agency, or does it say it's spent when that agency says it's passed the money on to somebody else?
So it will be, I think it will be a combination of those things. When the money is distributed by the Scottish Government to public bodies, some will say that the money has distributed, but I think we're also seeing that there's a distinction between not all the money, even though it's been allocated. I think that's an important distinction. The allocation of the money doesn't equate to it being spent. I think what we've tried to capture in part in the paper is that to an extent that's not unexpected, because either the rate of uptake of some of the allocation of these funds, whether through businesses or whether it's programmes that were anticipated to straddle more than one financial year. So there's an inevitability that there'll be a difference between the total allocation, total spending. But I'll just ask Fiona or Mark if they want to come in just to say about what we understand about how that's been recorded in individual public bodies.
So just to develop that point that the Auditor General was touching on there, Mr. Bowman. So it depends on the type of funding we're talking about. Broadly, what we've talked about in terms of the commitment of the 8.6 billion is that that's a budgeting commitment, and the funds have been earmarked, as you know, and provided for particular initiatives. The extent to which that then gets booked, if you like, as spent will depend on those initiatives and the nature of that money. To give a couple of examples, where additional money is provided to local government through the funding package, that money counts as government expenditure at the point it's given to local government, and what local government will then go on to spend it using its own plans. In the health service, that money might be earmarked for the health service, but it's not until the health service has actually spent the money that, if you like, the expenditure is recognised. And as you know, the accounts are the vehicle for pulling that assessment, pulling that information together. I think on the broader point, government has done an assessment of the expenditure that it expects to incur across the range of its spending programmes as part of the spring budget revision process. So it's not that they don't have any information about that, but it's their assessment of that based on the best information that they've got available. It's only once we see the accounts that we'll see how much of that has been spent and in what areas the actual money's been spent.
So if you start at the top of the tree in the Scottish Government and setting this up, I mean, if you were another organisation, you would have an agency agreement or a contract and how it would be, spent and reported. Has this been gone through in that respect? I mean, has the Scottish Government looked as to how they can control this and make sure that the money that they have to report on is properly recorded and reported?
So you're quite right. There's a real onus on understanding of the roles and responsibilities of parties when money is important. Also, I think, of the control environment and the governance arrangements. So we're in the process of doing exactly that through our work, and we'll be reporting back to the successor committee and publicly on the arrangements that have taken place to ensure money has been spent. I think it's important, as we touch on in the paper, is that there's a likelihood with the pace that money has been spent that it won't all have been spent as originally anticipated. I think it's right to recognise that. We'll continue to report on how the money's been spent, but I think given the pace, particularly the height of the pandemic, that money was being passed out and spent, is that there's a possibility that not all of it will have been spent well or as originally intended.
Oh, just as a final point, will some of this money gone outside the boundary or the envelope of the Scottish Government accounts? And And would whole public sector accounts help in making sure that all of this is captured?
So it will be no surprise to the committee for me to be very supportive of that point, Mr. Bowman. I think it feels like it's an essential component of Scottish Government's public financial reporting, that it's got that complete picture across all of its public bodies, not just those within the Scottish Government accounting boundary, but particularly, as you indicate, where local government spending is part of that complete picture of assets and liabilities, and that would be just part of the fabric of annual financial reporting. So as the committee knows, we're extremely keen to see progress on that as soon as possible.
Thank you. I think the whole public sector accounts is something we will push with. Thank you, Convener.
Gail Ross, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. I just want to follow up that line of questioning that Bill Bowman was going on there. I know that COSLA are not here to speak for themselves this morning, but I wanted to put to you, Auditor General, a quote that was in a recent press release that came to us about COVID spend. And I'm just going to quote a short passage. It says, COSLA welcomes the 259 million non-recurring funding to address COVID pressures next year and the commitment to pass on additional loss of income consequentials. Our ask is that additional COVID money is passed to local government with no strings, no reporting and no questions about the value of essential services provided every day by councils. Can you give me your opinion on what you think that statement means, and how do you work with the Accounts Commission to ensure that the money is indeed tracked, as you were talking about previously?
Maybe take those in reverse order, if I may, Ms. Ross. So I work extremely closely with the Accounts Commission. The programme of work that I'm referring to in terms of following the pandemic round is across public audit in Scotland. So Audit Scotland carrying out work on behalf of itself and the Accounts Commission to have that complete picture of how the COVID monies have been spent, really regardless of the status of the public body in Scotland. So working very closely, so happy to make that confirmation. In terms of the wider point about COSLA's request for, if I've not seen the quotes, I'm just kind of, if I've heard you rightly, about no strings and no reporting on how that money's been spent, and it's for councils to make that determination. I think that's a matter for the government, Scottish Government and local government, to continue that conversation. Public reporting and transparency is captured alongside the not an impediment, particularly during the height of the pandemic, to get money to deliver services to individuals, businesses. I think the basis of this morning's conversation, I think also through our own paper, is that we would say that there's a real need for aggregated reporting and transparency of that money. So no strings and no reporting. I think ultimately that will be a decision for government and local government to take together. But I think what we would be supportive of is that there's a clear line of sight, transparency, and at the right time able to make the kind of value for money judgments about how well this very significant public investment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions on this report for the Auditor General and his team? No? Okay. Can I then suspend briefly for 3 minutes, I think, to allow a changeover of witnesses for the next agenda item? Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is the Section 23 report on NHS in Scotland 2020. I welcome our witnesses to the meeting today, Caroline Lamb, Chief Executive, NHS Scotland and Director General for Health and Social Care, Richard McCallum, Interim Director of Health, Finance and Governance, Fiona McQueen, Chief Nursing Officer, and Gregor Smith, Chief Medical Officer, all from the Scottish Government. I understand that Caroline Lamb will make a brief opening statement. Caroline Lamb.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to start by saying that I very much welcome Audit Scotland's report and the opportunity to give evidence to the committee today for the first time as the new Chief Executive of NHS Scotland and Director General for Health and Social Care. The Audit Scotland report rightly recognises the significant efforts and the dedication of staff in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to start by placing on the record my own personal thanks to all the health and social care staff who have worked tirelessly over the last year to support our services. Coming into this role, I am reminded daily of the huge contribution that is made by so many, and I'm extremely grateful, as I'm sure we all are. Audit Scotland's findings and recommendations, along with wider scrutiny on the pandemic response, will be fully considered as we remobilise services, as we address the impacts of the pandemic, and as we undertake future preparedness work. The report recognises the innovation that has been achieved at significant pace, and we'll want to hold on to that. It also recognises that the swift actions taken across NHS Scotland and by Scottish Government have ensured that our NHS has not been overwhelmed and that vital services have been maintained. However, as the report sets out, there are lessons to be learned, and I'm committed to making sure that we do that. It's important to recognise that over the course of the last year, we have been learning, along with the rest of the world, and learning quickly. Sitting here today, we still don't understand every aspect of this virus, but we know exponentially more than we did a year ago. And as we've understood more, we've had to be agile, to adapt and to improve our response. We've taken significant steps at pace, treatments have improved, and our prevention and protection measures, including Test and Protect and our vaccination programme, have been rolled out in a matter of weeks. Looking ahead, we know that the pandemic will have longer-term implications. COVID-19 has not affected us all equally. It has brought into sharp focus existing health inequalities, and I'm determined that we will start to tackle those inequalities in our response to the pandemic, and that's central to the remobilisation, recovery and redesign plans that are being developed. This has been the most challenging of years for the NHS in Scotland, but it has stepped up time and time again, and I am proud to have the opportunity to lead the service as we continue to respond to and recover from COVID-19. I'll be very happy to answer any of the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline Lamb. Can I start by welcoming you to your post, a very critical post in the Scottish Government at this time. Can I also put on record my thanks, and I think I probably speak for the whole committee in this, to NHS staff across the country who have really stepped up in ways we will probably never know or never be able to imagine at this time, and their personal courage and bravery and commitment over the last year. And I think we're talking, it's nearly exactly a year now since the country went into lockdown. Can I pick up firstly on a couple of things you said in your opening statement, because for the last 5 years in my time on this committee, I used to question the Auditor General quite regularly on preventative spend and on tackling inequalities. And you mentioned tackling inequalities in your opening statement, as you said rightly, that COVID has really highlighted these. But in terms of a healthier population, public health, less obesity, better diet, which actually we've learned over the last year would all be so important as a prevention to a virus such as this, we have seen very, very little progress. But we have known for years, and we go back as far and further back than the Christie Commission, that this is absolutely necessary. And some would say it's been political pressure that has forced Scottish Government to focus perhaps on the acute sector of the NHS. But can I ask you, Caroline Lamb, as new in this job, how are you going to refocus that spend so our population is healthier to withstand a virus like this in the future?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'll maybe start by saying that throughout this pandemic, we have been using the concept of 4 harms across Scottish Government. So that's the direct harm from people impacted by COVID, the indirect harm that's been caused by the measures we've had to take to stand down other services to support our response to COVID, but also the harm that's been caused to our way of life, our society, and the normal way of living, the impact that this has had on people beyond their physical health, but quite often impacting on their mental health, and also the harm to our economy. And I think that addressing all those 4 harms are going to be absolutely critical, because when we talk about health inequalities, actually that's just a subset of the wider inequalities across our system. And I suppose the thing that I think many of us have found most inspirational in terms of the response to this pandemic has been how people have come together and genuinely united in the face of a single driving purpose in terms of responding to this pandemic. And I think that it's going to be really important for us to hang on to that and hang on to that balance of addressing the harms across our society. So you're absolutely correct that we do need to look at some of the downstream investment that we can make in order to actually improve the health and well-being of people across Scotland. But that's not going to be simply for the health and social care portfolio. We're going to have to look at how we actually can use investment in the economy and in other areas across Scottish Government, so that we give people the best possible chance of a long and healthy life. Thank you.
Can I put the same question to Gregor Smith and perhaps expand on it a little bit? Because certainly my time as an MSP, I'm coming to the end now, but over the last 10 years, my conclusion has been that public health policy is focused on areas where there is a lot of harm already, such as in drugs and alcohol misuse, and that is rightly so. However, on that prevention issue, that government after government has been said they're committed to shifting spend to prevention, that hasn't happened. How can that happen, Chief Medical Officer? Because it is critical as we move forward to making our population more robust against a pandemic such as this.
Thanks, Convener. I agree that it's an absolutely critical area that we must try to really focus as much attention as we possibly can over this coming period. In fact, next week when I publish my first annual report, there'll be a section devoted to some of the approaches that we can take in trying to tackle the health and social inequalities that we know exist across the country. We're not unique in that respect. In fact, if you look at the picture across much of Western society, then you find that many of those social inequalities and health inequalities that arise from those have been widening over time, particularly since a period in the kind of early 2000s, associated with the kind of financial crash that we had through 2008. So these are things that we must try to pick up the pace and address with real conviction. And I'm delighted that we have so much of a collective approach which is beginning to develop in terms of the conviction that the people have to tackle this once and for all. In speaking to colleagues across the clinical professions, there is a very real realisation that actually health's contribution to this, although very, very important, is only part of the story. Recent discussions with the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges in Scotland has been very encouraging in that they wholeheartedly want to support action in this area as well. But if you look at what health can contribute in this area, it's probably around 20% of the sum total. And it's that cross-society approach which becomes really important in trying to address some of the underlying issues that arise from this. Now, some of the changes that have happened within government over this last year, some of the improvements that we've made in terms of how the senior professional advisors come together and use evidence to try to take forward stories. I think we can build on that, we can capitalise on that. I have now wonderful relationships developed with other chief advisors within government, such as the chief economic advisor, the chief advisor on social policy, and it's those joint approaches across government in terms of the advice that we provide to ministers, which I think can help to take us forward and, as I say, with real conviction, start to tackle some of the issues, the deep-rooted issues that we have across society that can fix the underlying problem of health inequalities.
Okay, thank you very much, Gregor Smith. I'd now like to turn to Colin Beattie, please.
Thank you, Convener. And I would also like to join in the comments of the Convener, expressing my appreciation to the dedication and the work that's been done by NHS staff across Scotland. I'd like to look at senior leadership, however. In the past, there has been criticism in this committee about quality of senior leadership, the turnover of senior leadership, and there seemed to be some slight improvement, probably assisted by a focus on a rather smaller number of shared goals in terms of that, but nevertheless improvement. But the Auditor General in his report says there continues to be a lack of stable senior leadership with high turnover and short-term tenure. Now that cannot be good. And I'll just again quote from the Auditor General's report, where he's saying that there have been a turnover since April 2019 of 10 board chairs, 14 chief executives, 8 directors of finances, and 2 NHS boards had more than one change of chief executive in that same period. Caroline Lamb, you yourself are now new to this job. There's turnover on the chief medical officer, the chief nursing officer. It's not indicating stability. Would you be able to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that question. The first thing that I would say is that the NHS is a huge and complex organisation, and therefore inevitably we expect turnover. I would also highlight the fact that NHS chairs have a maximum term of office of 8 years, and so within those statistics are included a number of NHS chairs who actually reach the end of their maximum term of office, and also that when people retire within NHS Scotland, and we've had a number of chief executives retire during the period quoted within the Audit Scotland report, that tends to create a ripple effect as people move around the system with opportunities to move to different health boards or with opportunities for promotion. So just to give you some examples there, we saw Callum Campbell move from being chief executive in Lanarkshire through to being chief executive of NHS Lothian, thus creating a vacancy as and a new appointment as chief executive in Lanarkshire. We also saw Carol Potter move from being director of finance in Fife to being chief executive in Fife, creating a vacancy both for a new director of finance. And actually, I'm part of those statistics as well, because I came out of being a chief executive in an NHS board to take up this post in Scottish Government. So I guess what I would say is that it is inevitable that we will have some movement. I think it is important to recognise that actually we've been really pleased with the quality of candidates that we've seen coming forward for those senior posts, and that is, I think, a credit to the work that's been done in areas such as Project Lift to provide development and leadership opportunities for our senior cohort across NHS Scotland. We also provide a huge amount of support and development activity, and we've been, over the course of the last year, looking at how we need to enhance that, recognising the fact that particularly for our new chief executives, they don't have those informal opportunities to meet with colleagues in the same way as they would have done pre-pandemic. So we're putting in place revised induction and onboarding procedures based on the feedback that we've had from new executives. But actually, I think, you know, if you look at the numbers starkly, then it paints a picture that you need to just dig underneath that a little bit. And what we're seeing is absolutely expected retirals and people reaching the end of their terms of office, but actually a strong pipeline of people coming through to fill those posts, which is really welcome.
You say that we need to dig beneath these figures. The Audit Scotland has, and they are expressing concern. They did recommend previously that the ideal tenure in a post would be 5 years. Are you any place towards achieving that?
So I would need to go back in the detail to check the length of tenure. I think that what we have seen is we've seen a number of experienced colleagues moving into posts when they were relatively close to retirement age and then retiring. So people retiring, but doing that and being able to do that in a way that had helped to develop people within their own system and more broadly. So we can certainly have a look at the detail of that and get some more information to you.
It would be interesting to see. The other thing is there's obviously been some improvements in leadership, again, assisted by moving away from the numerous targets set in various institutions and sectors. Has the Scottish Government considered how to revise its current accountability frameworks, or how they could be improved based on lessons from the pandemic?
I think in terms of thinking about lessons learned from the pandemic, it's still pretty early days in relation to starting to think about and have discussions about some of the decisions we'd make about the changes we have to make. We've already just had a conversation about the need to focus on health inequalities, and that will mean thinking about how we measure our performance and what are the measures we use, and what are the targets that we would want to set. And that's a conversation that I think we would want to have with clinicians, with the public in relation to what they expect and what they want to see from NHS and social care services. And also, obviously, it's very much a matter for ministers. I think one of the things that we would maybe want to reflect on is the extent, and it comes back to what I was saying earlier about how people have been united around a really common and obvious mission during this pandemic, and the extent to which that has enabled people to be really clear about their accountability and responsibility to act. So there are a lot of things that I think have grown out of the response to the pandemic, but we're not quite out of that response yet, and we would want, I think, to take some time to reflect on that and be really clear about which of the things that we want to embed and how we best do that going forwards.
One thing which the Audit Scotland report emphasises is the impact of short-term tenure on the stability that's needed for effective strategic planning and reform and developing effective working relationships. Now, on paragraph 60, I notice that Audit Scotland mentioned the need for collaborative relationships. I don't know if that's a coded message to us or not, but presumably relates to the short-term tenure. Would you agree that is a problem with short-term tenure and that it's something that needs addressed?
I wouldn't link the two things. I wouldn't link short-term tenure and the development of strong collaborative relationships. And one of the reasons I don't make that direct connection is because we are fortunate in Scotland in having a system where we do see, and I've given you some examples earlier, we do see people moving from one position to another within health boards and across health boards, and therefore all part essentially of the same ecosystem and not having to start from scratch and build new relationships as they go into a post. I would absolutely agree that collaborative relationships are essential. Collaborative relationships have strengthened hugely. Gregor was just talking about it in relation to relationships between professional advisors, but that applies, I think, across the piece. Different organisations, across health boards, across health and social care partnerships and across local authorities have come together to work at pace in a way that we haven't seen before. Again, that's been a bit about having an absolute common purpose. And I think as well, supported by the really regular interactions that we've all had to keep that flow of information. So I would say that we have seen really significant improvements in collaboration during the course of the last year, and that is absolutely something that we need to hang on to and nurture going forwards.
I mean, clearly the NHS needs good quality leadership to take it forward, and we have in this committee seen repeatedly failures in that leadership in key areas. Progress has been made. How are you going to harness the good practice in leadership that was achieved and take it forward beyond the pandemic?
Thank you. I think in terms of some of the areas that I've just highlighted around collaboration, around being clear about priorities and a single purpose, those are all things that I think help leaders to come together. But over and above that, the learning that we've had out of this pandemic will influence our leadership and development and support programs going forwards. I think we would want increasingly to make sure we were already working on cross-sector leadership programs, but I think we would increasingly want to do that, particularly as we seek to address some of the inequalities and seek to work across all sectors of our society and economy in the way that Gregor Smith articulated earlier.
Thank you. I think that the successor committee will probably come back on these leadership issues in the future. Back to you, convener.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can we have Graham Simpson, please?
You certainly can, convener. And can I echo the comments of the convener and Colin Beattie in thanking NHS staff across Scotland for all the work you've been doing. Can I start by asking, can you just give us an updated figure of how many deaths there have been from COVID? You know that figure?
I'm sorry, I don't have that immediately in front of me, but I will get it for you.
Okay. I'm curious, whatever the figure is, on death certificates, COVID is mentioned as so you'll have COVID on a death certificate. My question is it always as a result of COVID, or is it a case that somebody has had COVID at some point?
So just, I'll ask Gregor Smith to come in around the specifics around recording on death certificates, but I just to note that the Scottish Government does publish those statistics on a daily basis, and I will provide an update to the committee once those statistics have been published this afternoon. Thank you. Gregor, are you able to come in around the death certificate point?
Yeah, there are two different ways that we measure the number of deaths that have been associated with coronavirus infection just now. There are those that we publish on a daily basis and which are associated with a confirmed positive coronavirus test within a 28-day period. The latest figure that we have today is 7,483 deaths, which we have now are able to confirm. There's a further measurement which NRS publish on a weekly basis, and these are deaths where coronavirus has been mentioned on a death certificate. Now, that does not mean to say that the death has been directly as a result of coronavirus, but it may be that coronavirus has been a contributory factor. And I have to say that it's that section 2 part that may have contributed, which is the important part in terms of the language there. So this allows clinicians, for instance, for perhaps someone who has died of another cause, but whose overall condition may have deteriorated with a contribution from having had coronavirus as a result of that. So there are nuances in the way that as clinicians we record deaths on these death certificates that are slightly different from the daily published data that we have. We also have to remember, of course, that for some people who die as a result of coronavirus, that sometimes their illness is long and protracted, and some people are ill for some length of time beyond that 28-day period and subsequently die. And those wouldn't be necessarily, those deaths wouldn't necessarily be captured on the daily figures, but would be captured within the NRS figures that are published on a daily basis. Oh, sorry, on a weekly basis.
So if somebody's died of something else, but they've had COVID at some point, are we recording that they've actually died of something else and not COVID?
So within the death certificate, yes, there may be if you like, of the main cause of death, it may be something separate from coronavirus, but coronavirus has been felt to be contributory in some form. Likewise, on the daily published data, when we say that someone has died with a diagnosis of coronavirus within a 28-day period, they may have tested positive within that 28-day period, but died for another reason. That's why when it comes to examining the overall impact, the tragic impact of coronavirus on our society, the best way that we can do that is to use what's called excess deaths. We have a system in place where in regular time we examine the number of deaths that we have over what we would expect in any given period, and each year Health Protection Scotland examine those deaths and look for changes in the patterns which may come from a whole variety of reasons, usually as a result of some sort of infectious agent, and they link with other European countries through some of the surveillance networks that we have to compare experiences. And that's exactly the same process that we will see with the overall impact of COVID-19 and the SARS-CoV-2 virus, is that those excess deaths will be examined in some detail so that we can accurately chart what each country's experience was with coronavirus and the impact that it's had on those populations in terms of mortality.
That's very useful, and that's taken me neatly into an area that I wanted to explore with you, and that was around excess deaths, because that was mentioned by the Auditor General in his report, and we've seen quite a large number of excess deaths across the board, for a number of conditions, which is a concern. We've also seen waiting times going up, and I wonder whether either yourself, Caroline Lamb, or Dr. Smith thinks there's a link between waiting times going up and excess deaths.
So Caroline, I perhaps come in first and you can follow up, but in terms of examined in much greater detail before we can provide that level of specific comment on that. Many of the deaths that we've seen within that excess deaths category could be associated with the coronavirus as well, indirectly, because of the types of illness that we are seeing them being attributed to. So that all needs further analysis and understanding, which will happen over time. As I say, Health Protection Scotland have a mechanism by which they do that on an annual basis anyway, and compare experience with other countries. But I think undoubtedly, when you look at the vast proportion of those excess deaths that we've tragically experienced across Scotland over the last 12 months, by far the greatest proportion can be directly attributed to the harm which has been caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID-19 infection that it causes.
Okay, so it's not because people are not being treated for other conditions. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we would need to have much deeper analysis, which is underway, to determine exactly what proportions it might of those excess deaths may be for other reasons. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of why this is important. We know that the SARS-CoV-2 virus and COVID-19 can cause lots of complications. Some of those complications might include vascular events such as stroke or such as myocardial infarction or heart attack. That excess death would be attributed to just maybe a cardiovascular cause. But what we wouldn't be able to capture directly is whether that was because someone had decided not to attend and seek help because of their chest pain, or whether it had actually arisen as a secondary complication of the COVID-19 infection. So that deeper level of analysis is required before we can fully understand exactly what the relative contributions for each of these issues is.
So speaking of waiting times, my concern, I'm sure it's a concern of all yours as well, is that as we emerge from the pandemic, we're going to have a lot of people who have not had treatment that they ordinarily would have had. So there's quite a backlog, and I just wonder whether you can give us a flavour of the scale of that and how long it will take you to get through things. I suppose, Caroline Lamb, if we could ask you that one.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I think the backlog that we've got at the moment is formed of two parts, if you like. So there's the backlog that we absolutely know about in terms of the people who are on waiting lists, and we are, as we start to be able to remobilise services again, and when we were able to start to remobilise services back in the summer, we are very conscious of the requirement to start to be able to treat people, but also about the requirement to be able to do that in a priority order, so that we're prioritising those people in greatest need. We have at the end of February received remobilisation plans from all our NHS boards, so we're in the process of working through those, and we also need to take account of the, if you like, what you might call the unrecorded backlog. So we have been looking at the details, and we're still working through the data to understand that when and some of this is included in the Audit Scotland report around the fall off in presentations, and what that might mean in terms of a demand that hasn't yet presented itself. So the position on that is that we are in receipt of remobilisation plans from all NHS boards, which are looking at how during 21-22 we can start to remobilise services. A lot of this will be dependent on the progress of the pandemic, and at the same time we need to retain in place all our measures to combat the pandemic. And the other element of that is being mindful of the level of exhaustion of our staff. So I think, as everybody on this committee has recognised, NHS and indeed social care staff have done a tremendous job over the last year, and that has been at some significant cost to those individuals. And we are conscious, particularly, of there is a backlog of untaken annual leave, and we need to ensure that as we are able to start to mobilise services and start to recover the position, that we do that in a way that enables staff to recover as well, and to actually take some of the annual leave that's due to them and get a bit of downtime. So we're not yet in a position to be clear about exactly how long we expect that to take, and as I say, that will also very much be influenced by what happens in terms of the progression of the pandemic, but we are working through those plans at the moment.
I'm able to say right now across Scotland we've got a 6-month backlog or a year's backlog, and I appreciate it's different for different health boards and indeed for different conditions. But you're not in a position to give us that sort of figure.
I think so. So at a granular level, we are absolutely aware of how many people are waiting at different levels. But in terms of giving that total figure across Scotland, I wouldn't want to do that, because that starts to disguise different specialties, different people who are in different priority categories, and it also doesn't yet address that picture around the people who we think we've missed so far because they haven't presented. Okay,
I've just got one other related area to ask about, and it relates to something in the Auditor General's report where he says that the government and NHS boards should continue to monitor the levels and impact of people avoiding attending their GP or hospital, and that action should be taken to mitigate any adverse impacts of that. So do you know what the current rate of people saying that they won't go to the GP or hospitals is, for whatever reason?
Yeah, so we monitor this really through polling, and the most recent polls we have, which I believe is from the 5th of March, indicated that the statement was, would you be concerned about? I think the statement was something around, would you be too concerned to present to GP practice if you had something serious that was non-COVID related? And there was 60% of people who disagreed with that statement. So that would imply 60% of people who felt comfortable. There were 25% who agreed with the statement, who were therefore still cautious. And of that 25%, I think it's 7% who agreed strongly with that. So that position has shifted. We're seeing more people being prepared to come forward. And you'll be aware that we ran and have continued to run quite a significant campaign around the NHS being open in order to encourage people who may have conditions that absolutely need to be checked out to present.
Yeah, I think there's a different question that should be asked. It's not will you go to your doctor or hospital if you've got something seriously wrong. It is, what if it's just a minor ailment? Do people feel they don't want to bother the doctor at this time, or that there's no point?
So yeah, that's a legitimate question as well, and I guess it's down to people's individual judgments about what's minor and what's major. One of the things that we were able to implement starting in the winter of 2020 was our redesign of urgent care, which is around ensuring that we are able to clinically triage people who are presenting, who would otherwise present at A&E. And obviously part of the reason there was wanting to make sure that we didn't experience overcrowding with all the issues around social distancing in A&E. So there's a really well-established service. NHS 24 run the 111 line, and there are really well-established procedures for people who have concerns to get in touch with NHS 24 and be triaged in terms of, is this something that can be dealt with by a pharmacist? Is it something that they need to present to a GP, or indeed do they need some urgent care?
Okay. I see Dr. Smith wants to come in on that.
Yes, Gregor Smith, please.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important area, to make sure that people feel comfortable and able to access services when they need it for whatever reason, because that perception of need is an important part of the question that you're asking here just now. And we've tried to ensure that we've got different mechanisms by which people can do that, so that they feel wholly comfortable doing that. First thing is to make sure that within that primary care environment, where 90% of all consultations take place within primary care, is that we have separate pathways for those people who may be infectious and suspect that they have COVID, and those who may need care for other reasons. So GP practices have remained open, albeit GP practices have been providing care in a slightly different way than we've become used to over time. They still do face-to-face consultations when those are necessary, but people are able to access those and see clinicians that they're familiar with by contacting either by phone or by this wonderful use of the new technology called Near Me, which has just been a revelation over the course of this pandemic and has enabled so many more people to very safely access services in a way that suits them and prevents the need for any travel, but also allows their conditions to be properly and safely assessed as well. So Near Me has been one of the many technological innovations over the course of the pandemic, which I think has been a real attribute to the way that we deliver care within Scotland. And I would again emphasise that people can use this technology if they're feeling apprehensive about attending any of these consultations in person, to make sure that they're getting the advice that they're seeking in a way which, as I say, suits them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Convener.
Gail Ross, please.
Thank you, Convener. And I would also like to put on record my thanks to all the staff in the NHS that have worked so hard and continue to do so. My line of questioning actually follows neatly on from that. I wanted to ask about NHS Near Me, which of course we're very proud of up in the Highlands, having started it up here. I'm from Caithness, so that really reduced a lot of trips from Caithness down to Raigmore. So very proud that it's now been used in such a vital way across the country. But to go back to the report that we were talking about, it notes that the Scottish Government has committed to review and develop the role of these assessment hubs and also the virtual appointments. But safeguarding was brought up in the evidence session with the Auditor General, and particularly in relation to not, I guess, dissuading people from in-person appointments if that is the best thing for them. And also the very important point of maintaining patient privacy. So can you tell the committee what safeguarding and equalities measures will be considered as part of that review into the video conferencing, please? Caroline Lamb.
Yes, thanks very much. And I would absolutely echo. I think, Highland was one of the early adopters of Near Me and absolutely led the way. And I think one of the things that has been great to see over the last year is Near Me moving away from being seen as something that was a bit niche for remote and rural areas to something that is far more sits at the heart of our services. We had there was an evaluation of Near Me that reported, I think, in about June 2020. Now that obviously predated the pandemic, and we commissioned a further evaluation to take into account the rapid scale up of Near Me through the course of the pandemic. That's due to report at the end of this month. But some of the key issues that have been examined in that evaluation are firstly around the clinical appropriateness and being clear when it is appropriate and clinically appropriate to use a remote consultation. And there will clearly be aspects of consultation that are not appropriate to be done remotely. There will be aspects where it is appropriate but needs to be supplemented by the GP or the consultant having access to maybe data from a monitoring device that the individual has. And there'll be areas where absolutely it is appropriate. It was noted that actually the quality of the technology platform is generally very high. Huge value being reported in terms of reduced risk of infection, reduced travel, and opportunities to think about delivering services in a very different way. And I think just to note that we went from around 300 consultations a week done virtually in early March last year up to over 22,000 a week now, which is very significant progress. However, there were also concerns raised around inequalities in access, and partly that's around people being digitally connected. It's also around IT literacy, but also just what you raised, that lack of private space. And that chimes very much with the Equality Impact Assessment, which we published in September 2020, which recognised that there will be key groups, particularly people who are in difficult domestic circumstances, as an example, for whom home consultation may not provide them with the privacy that they would require. And therefore, it is absolutely essential that we do retain that face-to-face option. And it may be going forwards as we think about how remote consultation can be used to support that remobilisation of redesign of services going forwards, that we could look at other ways in which we're able to provide remote consultation. So you might be able to go to maybe a local community centre and be able to engage there with a remote consultation with a consultant who's at the other end of the country. So there are things that we can do to balance that, but we would never want to say that actually remote is the only way in which you could do that. We always need to retain face-to-face consultations, and I'm sure that Gregor would absolutely support that. And I think the final thing we would say is that I think the other thing that's been great has been seeing Near Me rolled out into care homes as well, and also other digital technology that's been used. VCreate is one that's been used to enable people, particularly those in intensive care, to keep in touch with their families through a video link at a point when families haven't been able to visit. So there's been a huge amount of innovation there, but absolutely we are mindful about some of the safeguarding issues and the equality issues.
Thank you. Fiona McQueen?
What Caroline said, I think that the safeguarding, at times a digital presence may not allow the practitioner to have a full assessment, particularly within children and young people or older people. So it may well be there's issues of coercive control or harm that wouldn't necessarily be picked up, but to reassure the committee that the policy teams and the practitioners, have now a year's worth of evidence of that, and that's why practitioners, it's absolutely the digital option has been amazing for a lot of people, but the in-person, in-presence requirement or helpful assessment by the registered practitioner is also noted. So practitioners are aware of safeguarding issues that would need to take place that may be masked by digital consultation, and that is something that the multidisciplinary, multi-agency teams are very alert to, very aware of, and are taking into consideration.
Thank you. Dr. Smith?
Maybe perhaps one final word on this, which is, I think, just as important, and first of all, to emphasise that this is an option, not a replacement. And I think
Gregor Smith, Gregor Smith, can I interrupt? I'm not hearing you very well. Can you sit forward a little bit, please, or nearer your microphone? I'm struggling to hear you clearly.
Hopefully you should be hearing me now.
That's a little bit better.
I'll continue. But one of the things that we would want to emphasise again with NHS Near Me is it's an option, not a replacement. But perhaps a hidden benefit of it that people don't realise is that as we look forward to COP26, which we'll be hosting in Scotland later on this year, dealing with some of the contribution that we can make towards climate change. The use of NHS Near Me in Scotland has now saved approximately 28 million miles of travel for people who have used it, which I think is a fabulous contribution actually to how we reduce the impact of climate change as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Just moving on to a new topic.
Excuse me, Gail, can I interrupt a minute? There is disturbance on. We're not getting a clear feed. Broadcasting, can you advise me where the problem might be, please?
We'll look into it, Jenny, and Convener, we'll see if we can do our best.
Okay. Have the OR managed to get everything that's been said in the last couple of minutes? I'll take that as a yes. Okay, Gail, sorry to interrupt, please continue.
No, that's okay. I was feeling a wee bit there as well, Convener, but thanks for that. I just wanted to ask about PPE. Certainly as a constituency MSP, I was contacted quite often about PPE and whether or not the staff had the correct PPE, or what they saw as the correct PPE and the amount of PPE. And certainly in the report there are findings from the British Medical Association member survey which found that lack of access, again using this word correct or sufficient PPE, was highlighted by 16% of respondents as their most concerning issue. And also Royal College of Nursing survey found that of those working in higher risk environments, 25% had not had their mask fit tested and 47% were asked to reuse single-use equipment, which is very concerning, I'm sure you'll agree. Is there any work ongoing or plan to assess the impact of these issues both on the staff and on the patients, and how would the Scottish Government assess this in a meaningful way going forward? And I suppose Caroline Lamb, you could start off that. Thanks.
I'll start off on that, and I'll probably then bring in Fiona McQueen, particularly around some of the infection prevention control and how we actually issue, how the guidance around what standard of PPE is appropriate is developed. I guess maybe just to start off that, clearly we saw an unprecedented demand for PPE during the course of this pandemic. We are fortunate in Scotland in having a single National Services Scotland, who are responsible for the procurement of PPE and the maintenance of the pandemic stockpile of PPE. And we moved very quickly to ensure that NSS were able to support not just NHS boards, but also primary care and social care organisations, including care homes. But there was an unprecedented demand, and to give, I think it's within the Audit Scotland Committee, it notes that in early February 2020, NSS was shipping around 97,000 items of PPE, but by early April that was up to about 24.5 million items. And in terms of the very specialist, the FFP3 masks, there were around the shift in numbers on that moved from around 2,000 to a month up to 1.8 million. We were fortunate in that we didn't actually run out of PPE, but we recognised that we had to take really, really swift action to improve some of the distribution chains. That included setting up PPE hubs across the country, and NSS also instituted a portal whereby boards could report any issues with PPE. The standards of PPE, so all PPE has to be assessed by the Health and Safety Executive in terms of its appropriateness. And I guess the other issue there at a board level is very much around fit testing. And again, I think one of the things that we have learned through this pandemic is the requirement to be agile and to be able to respond quickly as issues have occurred. So as part of that response, NSS were able to provide 40 fit test machines into our NHS boards, which rapidly scaled up our ability to effectively and efficiently fit test staff for masks. And this is a complex area in that there are different types of masks that need to be fit tested. They fit differently onto different faces, and if your face changes, you might have been fit tested, but if you had facial hair and you remove that facial hair, or if you either lose or gain weight, then you would need to be fit tested again. So there's a lot of complexity around this, and I think that one of the things that we would definitely want to focus on in terms of our preparedness in future is having that ability at a board level, using fit test machines to be able to rapidly fit test staff who are often being redeployed from areas where they would not previously have required to be fit tested, and to be able to manage things that way. But I'll maybe just ask Fiona McQueen if she wants to say anything around the development and ongoing vigilance around the guidance around what sort of PPE is appropriate for what sort of role.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. We're very fortunate in Scotland to have an internationally recognised national infection prevention and control manual that's evidence-based and gives the advice that people need in terms of what PPE is required. There's no doubt that staff were under huge pressure and there was a big anxiety. I think Gregor's already talked about this unknown virus, uncertain about what it would do. So across the UK, we developed and agreed infection prevention and control guidance, and that was issued in early April to emphasise and to supplement what was already there. And there was clearly anxiety from staff about would they need to wear a face mask or not, would they need that additional protection of the filtered face mask. And what was really important was communication, is that people knew what PPE they required, and at times there's no doubt that some people believed they needed additional levels of protection than the evidence would have suggested. Now that wasn't blameworthy. People were anxious, they were worried about treating people with COVID-19 and then taking it back to their families. So we did need to work very, very hard about explaining and letting people understand and have a confidence. And the guidance we issued in April, although we were saying for people who were not within 2 metres and their patients or if it was social care, their clients didn't have COVID, we then said if those members of staff want to wear a fluid-resistant surgical face mask, they could. So we tried to be as facilitative as possible. Again, we did not run out of PPE within Scotland, but there was no doubt the distribution, particularly out to our care homes. So the employer has the responsibility to provide that PPE. So until we took over providing that to care homes, there were times where distribution was tight. There's no doubt about that. And my nursing and medical colleagues within our big hospitals would also say, when a big delivery came, there was no doubt a big relief that, the PPE was going to be there for people. So that's what we did. We are continuing to look at the evidence to determine, is our current PPE right and proper? We've also put in guidance about how we care for people with COVID-19 or suspected COVID-19 and people as we're remobilising the NHS who don't, so our red and green pathways and providing advice on that. And again, the filtered face masks, we gave discretion for people in the green pathways, as we would call them, if they were carrying out procedures where they would require a filter mask. In the red pathway, we were facilitative, and if people wanted to do that, then we would support that. In terms of going forwards, then we need to constantly communicate. We need to listen to staff, and our professional organisations are incredibly helpful for us to work in partnership with, so that we get a real understanding of what staff are finding challenging, what they're afraid of, and so we can respond. And one of the things that we're developing just now is a series of webinars, so that we can have full access for grassroots staff to talk to the experts about what their concerns are, what they want to see developed and move forwards, and how we can provide that greater assurance and advice. At no time did we ask people to reuse single-use PPE. That happened in other parts of the United Kingdom, and whilst we recognised that other parts of the United Kingdom were doing that, we were never in a position where that was required. There are some areas of whether it's visors that are actually manufactured to be reusable, and when that was the case, then we would be giving instruction in how to appropriately use these. And similarly, we also gave sessional use. So normally in a surgical ward, you would put a mask on to treat one patient. But with COVID-19, the expert advice was to have, you could have sessional use if you wanted to. So some of the communication got mixed up along the way in that, and we've absolutely learned from that. We've provided posters, we're working hard, and that dialogue with the widest group of staff across Scotland we're hoping to have within webinars, but constantly keeping that under review.
Okay, thanks. That's actually really reassuring, and thanks for that clarification. Professor McQueen, just in case I don't get to speak to you again, I want to wish you all the best in your future endeavours, and thank you for all your work. I have one last question, Convener, with your indulgence. I would probably direct this either to Caroline Lamb or Dr. Smith, and it's about the manufacture of PPE in Scotland. And I believe that we had a target of 90% being manufactured here by this month, actually, excluding gloves. Do we know where we are on that aim? Have we achieved that yet?
Yes, I can respond to that. So if we exclude gloves, then yes, we have hit the 90%. If we count gloves in, then I believe we're around 50%.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Okay. Alex Neil, please.
Okay, thank you, Convener. And can I, first of all, as an ex-Health Secretary, say that I'm very proud of how the National Health Service and social care services have responded to the pandemic in Scotland. It's been absolutely outstanding, and everybody should be proud of what they've done. And can I also reiterate what Gail Ross said and wish Fiona McQueen, after many years of service to the National Health Service, all the best in her forthcoming retirement. Caroline, congratulations on your appointment. I haven't spoken to you since you were appointed, and the same to Gregor. Can I ask you about capacity? Because there are huge pressures on the National Health Service at any time. Added to that, we have COVID. Added to that, we have long COVID. And added to that, we have the backlog that's already been discussed. And I know you can't be precise at the moment because you're gathering the data together, as you said earlier. But what really worries me is the capacity in terms of critical staffing and in terms of finances to address all of those issues at once. And they all will need to be addressed simultaneously. It's a huge challenge by any standards. So you want to say a word or two just about the scale of the challenge and also the capacity issues that you'll be facing?
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think I'll start off by saying, so we've already had in this committee a conversation around the backlog and indeed the backlog that's on waiting lists, but also some of that unmet demand. So clearly that's one category. You've also yourself highlighted long COVID, and we're still, and Gregor Smith may want to come in on that, but we're still obviously learning about what the impact of long COVID is likely to be, and therefore what as a health service we're likely to need to provide. We are conscious of the impact on mental health and well-being within our own workforce, but also across the wider society. And I'd also add into that we've also stood up a substantial test and protect operation, and we have got a very, very significant, the biggest ever vaccination programme seen in Scotland ongoing. So I think your questions about capacity are really well made. So and early on in the pandemic, I think we were hugely successful in attracting back returners and retirees to support the effort. We also managed to deploy student nurses in the first wave, so that helped us through some of that first wave. I think thinking more longer term, and as we hopefully start to come out of this second wave and we start to think about remobilising services, then again, you're right, we're still working through the detail of some of this, but I guess in terms of giving you some clear indicators of where we're heading. So we are really clear that we need to support our workforce, that we need to ensure that we retain as much of our workforce as we possibly can to continue and to support us in remobilising services. And so a lot of the work we've done around the mental health and wellbeing network and the investment that we put in to support people has been about trying to make sure that our workforce feel properly supported and therefore that we retain people. We're also looking at how, so the test and protect, particularly in the contact tracing workforce, that's been a different sort of workforce. So we're trying wherever possible not to draw on registered clinicians in that work. And I think increasingly as we move through the vaccination programme, and we don't expect this to be a one-off vaccination programme, we do expect this to be something that we'll have to come back to with boosters. That we are looking at how we can deploy a different sort of workforce to support that. At the moment, we're able to draw from on a workforce, across many services, but as life gets a bit more back to normal, that won't be the case. I think the other thing that's really encouraging is what we've seen in terms of applications for undergraduate courses. Now, clearly they'll take some time to come through, but it's really welcome to see that applications for undergraduate nursing courses are up by 28%, and actually that 37% of those are from mature students. So we have a huge opportunity there to start to develop the workforce that we're going to need for the future. But I think that your points are absolutely well made. We're going to need to look at how we deploy our workforce most appropriately as well. So part of that, not just the remobilise, recover, the part of that redesign work is also ensuring that we can use the workforce that we have as effectively as possible and where they add value. So using things such as remote consultations to help to improve, release staff time would be really important as part of all of that as well.
Can I ask you about the use? Sorry. Can I ask you about the use of new technology, for example, robotics and artificial intelligence, particularly for diagnosis? I mean, we now have fairly exciting developments, both in robotics and artificial intelligence, and indeed in many other fields of innovation and technology relating to health. So how big a part can that play? I mean, as we know, with some of the developed AI use, some diagnosis can be done more accurately and much quicker than it can be done through normal channels. So, and you're looking at how particularly robotics and AI can be used as well as other new technologies.
We are absolutely looking at where the opportunities are to deploy robotics and indeed artificial intelligence to support. And artificial intelligence can be used in many ways. It can be used to support diagnostics and other measures on the front line. It can also be used to speed up some of our administrative processes and to ensure, for example, that we're able to communicate more appropriately and more effectively with patients. There's some work being done in NHS Lothian around using artificial intelligence to look at referrals coming in from GPs and to triage those. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for that. I don't know if Gregor wants to say anything from a clinical perspective about the opportunities in this area.
Gregor Smith?
I think Gregor's still
I'll take myself off mute. Yeah, I'll take myself off mute just to... I think this is a really exciting area for clinical practice just now, and what we're seeing now is that very creative disruption of the way that we used to do things and bringing in some of these new technologies to assist us in terms of making either the diagnosis faster or for us to be able to be more confident, and that relies on good data at its basis. And people will probably be aware of the Scottish Health Innovation Partnership, which is led from our Chief Scientific Officer, Professor Crossman. And I have to say some of the innovations which are coming out through that group, for instance, in diagnosis of skin lesions, eye lesions, so forth, are something that I think we'll see a much greater use of in the future. And this is about, at this moment in time, making sure that we build the governance and the processes around about this work to make sure that we are absolutely confident that it does what it intends to do. But certainly the data that we're seeing coming through from these innovative projects just now is very, very encouraging. I want to pick up on one of the points that Caroline made as well about our workforce for the future. Mr. Neil, you mentioned about the work that our NHS and social care staff have done across the country for the last year, and I do believe very firmly that this is having really quite an inspiring effect on attracting people into the profession. I've had data recently that shows that applications for medical and dental places at Scottish universities from Scottish domiciled students are up 23%, and that's wonderful to see that people are grasping this opportunity to take careers in these areas. We need to make sure that as we do that, we're attracting people from right across the social spectrum who have the ability to be able to enter these courses. That is a surefire way, go back to an earlier conversation, as how we can begin to reduce some of the inequalities that we're seeing across Scotland as well. And I think it's building on that really good work which has already started, which allows us in the future to make sure that the health and social care workforce comes from as wide a grouping of society as is possible.
Gregor Smith, on that point, sorry Alex, bear with me. On that point, have you done an analysis of the social background of these applications to medical school? Because one of my concerns I've raised in Parliament many times is that in our most deprived communities we can't get GPs to staff surgeries. This is an issue in Dundee, I believe it's issue in Fife and some other places across the country. Has the Scottish Government done that analysis? Because this will have an impact 8 years down the line when people qualify and then choose where they want to work. We need people who want to serve their own communities.
Can I just add to that, Convener, before Dr. Smith answers,
Yes.
both in terms of deprived, but also people from rural areas, because all the evidence shows historically that trainees coming from rural areas of Scotland tend to go back into rural areas much more than the average graduate. And they don't necessarily go back into the same rural areas, but they go back into rural areas. And for people like Gail living in Caithness, for example, example, that's critically important. And the other part of this is all these new entrants, when they graduate, can we make sure as many of them as possible stay in Scotland? Because we lose a lot of them who go further of Scotland, and they're lost to us very often forever.
Well, maybe, so a couple of direct questions on that then, Gregor Smith. Has the Scottish Government done that social analysis? And if so, can the committee please have it of those new applicants? And also, I've been trying to get this figure for years, but what is the current percentage of Scottish paid for medical graduates who are leaving Scotland to work in other health systems? Because I believe the amount of doctors, newly qualified doctors we are exporting is as high or higher than 40 to 50% at the moment.
Okay, so if we take those issues in turn, first of all, the first thing I want to say to you is that I agree that it is absolutely imperative that we expand the opportunities for people from all backgrounds to pursue careers right across every health and care profession, whether that be medicine, nursing, or any of the numerous types.
I know you'll agree. I know you'll agree with that statement, but can you answer my question? Have you done that analysis of the new applicants into medicine, of their backgrounds and geographical areas? Is that analysis available?
So the data that we have from UCAS just now and these new applications, I don't have available with me, but I can seek with the relevant policy area whether we've got that information available that we can share with you just now, Convener.
So you don't know if we've got it at the moment?
I am not aware if we have that or not, but I can check with the policy area to make sure that if it's available, we can share that with you.
Thank you. Okay.
Convener,
Sorry, Caroline Lamb.
Could I maybe just add to that, just to note, and Gregor and I can provide further briefing for the committee on this, but to note that the Scottish Government has invested over the last few years in additional places at medical schools that have been focused on widening access. So there has been a clear commitment from Scottish Government to open up to ensure that students from more disadvantaged backgrounds have routes into medical school, because we recognise how important that is. And just in terms of the question you asked about students, Scottish students who train in Scotland and then leave, again, I think we can provide that information to the committee. What I would say in relation to that is that my recollection, and I haven't looked at the data lately, but my recollection is that graduates may choose to leave for a period of time, but we actually have quite a good record of attracting them back into Scotland, but we will provide that data. So people may choose to go and work somewhere else, but as Mr. Neil also referred to, people tend to migrate back to where they came from, which is why it's so important that we have high numbers of Scottish domiciled students in our medical schools in the first place.
Bear with me, Mr. Neil, because the last data I looked at on this is that we have a far higher attrition rate in Scotland of medical students who qualify and then leave than we do at the English and Northern Irish medical schools. Now, you may be right, Caroline Lamb, that they are coming back, but that data is not available in the Scottish Government. So the Scottish Government, in all my time in Parliament, has never been able to provide this figure, but universities and others tell me it's 50%, which is a huge investment of taxpayers' money. It costs more to train a doctor than any other profession, and the Scottish Government is paying for that, and then we are losing these young doctors who are prepared to work perhaps longer hours or whatever, right in their early 20s, up to 50% of them, I think, but the Scottish Government's never been able to confirm that. So if you can confirm that to this committee before the end of this Parliament, I would be very grateful. Alex Neil.
Just a final question, Convener. Thank you for using up most of my time, but I've only got one final question. Can I go back to Caroline and just go back to this capacity issue and all the challenges? And I understand, you know, this is a moving target, but as things stand at the moment, when would you expect the National Health Service, particularly the acute sector, to get back into a kind of post-pandemic even keel? Now, I know that's a difficult question, but is it this calendar year? Is it more likely to be next calendar year? Or is this going to take a good 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 years to get back to where we were pre-pandemic?
So I understand I understand that you want to be able to be clear about, dates and times. I think that's really hard. It's really hard in terms of understanding the precise nature of the backlog that we have, both in terms of the backlog we know about and the unknown backlog. It's also very difficult because we actually don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic and what impact that will have. So I am not going to commit to absolute time periods on this, and I don't think you'll be surprised to hear me say that. What I would say is we will not get back up to steady state and where we were pre-pandemic during the course of the current financial year. It will be out beyond that because, as I've already said, quite apart from the issues around continuing to manage the pandemic and what that means in terms of social distancing, the extra time that it takes with donning and doffing PPE, but also cleaning. I think we do need to make sure that this year staff do take that leave that they're entitled to.
By the current financial year, I take it you mean the new financial year that starts in April?
Yes, I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. I'm already.
We don't expect you to be back to an even keel by the 5th of April.
No.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Neil. I'm going to finish with a local question. You may be aware, Gregor Smith and Caroline Lamb, of the Chief Executive of NHS Tayside's comments in this committee a couple of weeks ago that he can't guarantee the future of the breast cancer service for women in Dundee. I raised this issue with the First Minister last week. She said she would get back to me. I haven't heard anything yet. Can you please both tell me what work is ongoing to guarantee the future of this service for women in Dundee?
Yes, I can comment on that. I had a conversation with the Chief Executive of NHS Tayside this week, and John Conahan, as Chief Operating Officer of NHS Tayside, is meeting with the Chief Executive and other colleagues next week as part of the examination of their annual operating plan. As part of that, and I think I'm in fact top of the agenda, first on the agenda, is to get a absolutely clear understanding. So I'm aware from the conversations I've had with the Chief Executive this week of the efforts that they've been going to attempt to recruit new consultants into their breast service, and also work that's going on to look at what mutual aid can be provided across boards in the event that recruitment isn't as successful as we would want it to be. But we will be picking that up. As I said, I picked it up with the Chief Executive this week, and there's a follow-up conversation next week. So we are absolutely alert to the issues there and following them up.
Okay, well, thank you for that update. I'm going to follow up with the First Minister myself, and I hope to hear back from her directly on that. Gregor Smith, I don't think you got a chance because Alex and I were both keen to ask a question about the attrition rate. Do you know what the attrition rate is on newly qualified doctors going to other countries from Scotland currently?
I don't know, convener, what the current attrition rate is. It's been some time since I've looked at that data, but if it's available, we can pass that on to you.
I think it must be available because there are universities who are quoting it to me. So I'm sure the Scottish Government must have that figure. So if we could have that, that would be really, really helpful. Bill Bowman, please.
Oh, thank you, convener. If I can echo my colleagues' appreciation of the NHS staff and their sacrifices in this period. Caroline Lamb, I think you said at one point that the NHS is huge and complex, and you also spoke about it being agile during the pandemic and getting ourselves organised in that. Now, we've heard from others, and Alex Neil at the end there, that some of the organisations within the NHS have been subject of reports by the Auditor General. The management has not been so wonderful. You said, I think, that you were looking at 20 plus plans for the remobilisation, no doubt the health boards themselves and maybe the other national parts of the NHS. Can you give us some comfort that it's not a case of them just telling you what they want to do? I mean, I would expect you to be directing them, because if I'm honest, the people who contact me, constituents, they ask, when will I get my treatment? Not, is there a nice plan? That things build up and we review and we set up a committee and we look at this and we look at that. How do you keep the focus on clinical execution as opposed to process?
Yeah, thank you. So absolutely. In in respect of prioritisation and being really clear about having a consistent approach to how we prioritise the treatment of people who have been waiting, we published a clinical prioritisation framework in November 2020 that is clear about the different priorities that we accord to people who are waiting, and also very clear about the need to keep that under review, because people may change, the priority according to somebody may change. We also issued comprehensive guidance to NHS boards in December 2020 around the production of their 1 year annual operational plans for 21-22, and the review that is going on at the moment is very much around ensuring that those things that we would expect to be consistent across the country have been addressed by boards, whilst accepting that there will always need to be some local variation depending on geographies and other issues. So this isn't just a question of boards telling us what they want to do. This is very much of a question of us giving boards a structure and a framework and priorities within which to develop those plans, and then us reviewing those plans against those structures and priorities.
I mean, as you settle into the role, you're not necessarily new to the organisation. Do you find the structure cumbersome and inhibits you getting things done?
No, I don't. No, genuinely, I don't. I think that we are fortunate in Scotland of being of a size where we are able to get the right people in the right, these days, virtual rooms to have the conversations that we need to have, that ensure that we're able to take forward the priorities of Scottish Government and address. I think it's been amply demonstrated in the response to the pandemic, and as I said in my opening statement, I really welcome the fact that Audit Scotland have acknowledged how both NHS boards and Scottish Government responded at pace, and I think that that's an illustration of how the whole system absolutely comes together to make something work. And I think it's also important that we have boards that understand their local demographics, the issues in their local populations, and are in a position to respond to those as well.
I think I would be a supporter of localism. I think it's the balance between that and being agile, as you would say. Well, I wish you well in that. I won't be here to
thank you
to see you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you all very much indeed for appearing in front of committee this morning. I know it's a very challenging time for the NHS. Kind of wish you, Gregor Smith and Caroline Lamb, very best going forward in your roles, and Fiona McQueen, very happy and restful next chapter. And thank you for all your work. I'm now going to close the public session of this meeting as we move into private. Thank you.